Just a little disclaimer before we start today's video. We're going to be talking about electric vehicle and autonomous vehicle incentives and disincentives today, and that means we're going to be talking about politics. So if you're one of those people who is absolutely allergic to politics, it might be a good time to skip this video completely. Go watch one of the other videos, catch up with 10 from last week, or maybe watch yesterday's Renault Zoe eSport concept complete fangirl breakdown that I had. Go watch that. Hi everyone, it's Nikki Gordon-Bloomfield here from Transport Evolved. I can't believe it's Wednesday already. Looking forward to the weekend. I hope you are too. And today we're going to be talking about two very different news stories from different parts of the world that tie together really nicely. You see, over in the UK today, we had the spring budget. I say we, I'm not in the UK anymore, but I suppose as I'm still British, I still think of the UK as home. There's a lot of pomp and circumstance associated with the spring budget. It's kind of a big deal in the UK. It's televised. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's effectively the guy who's in charge of all the sums for the government, goes to 10 Downing Street and he has this old briefcase in which he has the speech for his budget speech, and then he goes to Parliament and he reads it to Parliament, and there's lots of jeering and there's lots of cheering. If you've ever watched British politics taking place, you'll know what I mean. If you haven't, go do that after you've watched this video because it's kind of entertaining. Anyway, that's not the point of what I want to talk to you about today. But during the budget today, Philip Hammond, who's no relation to Richard Hammond, I should point that out, gave the budget speech in which he increased vehicle excise duty for cars. Now, this tax is essentially levied against car owners in the UK. You have to pay your vehicle excise duty every year in order to be allowed to drive on the road. And if you're stopped by the police and you haven't paid your road tax for the year, you're getting a lot of trouble. So electric vehicles still don't have to pay road tax in the UK. Plug-in hybrids do, every other type of car does. But if it's a zero-emission vehicle like an electric vehicle or a hydrogen fuel cell vehicle, they pay zero road tax. Fuel duty in the UK was also frozen. Now that's something that consumer groups work very hard to lobby the government to not raise fuel duty. We already pay a very, very high tax on our diesel and our petrol in the UK, which is why the price per litre in the UK for diesel and petrol is so high when compared to other countries like the US or the rest of Europe. So you could say at this point that the UK is not necessarily encouraging electric vehicles, but in the budget speech, more money was sent towards electric vehicles. The government has already committed back in November to, I think it was about 300 million for electric vehicle charging stations, electric vehicle deployment, encouraging electric vehicle adoption across the UK. And in today's budget, we also heard of £270 million sent to driverless car programs. The UK is really keen to be at the forefront of driverless vehicle technology, autonomous car programs. It's already got plenty of pilot projects across the UK, but it's certainly pushing very hard to lead the world of autonomous vehicles. Now, part of the reason for this is that London, Birmingham, Manchester, Bristol, where I used to live, they all have major congestion problems, and autonomous vehicles are seen as one way to help alleviate congestion. Talking of which, there's also £600 million going towards helping cities that do have congestion problems alleviate those congestion problems, whether it's through the use of car share schemes, whether it's through the use of additional road building to help ease traffic flow, or whether it's to generate zero emission zones. Those funds are to help different cities cope. Case in point, Bristol, where I used to live, now has a programme that allows electric vehicles to drive in the bus lanes, which helps ease congestion and helps promote electric vehicles. So in the UK, electric vehicles are certainly being pushed and promoted very heavily, despite a very conservative government that's been quite restrictive on spending in other areas. Electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, they're really being pushed hard. Come back to the US, where I am now, and things are very, very different. There is a push across the whole US now, instigated by lobbying from automakers and lobbying from fossil fuel industries and the oil companies to basically give electric vehicles a hard time. This is effectively a two-pronged approach. The first part is to lobby the EPA to get rid of the fuel economy standards set by President Obama just before he left office, and to make it easier for automakers to meet fuel economy targets. Now, automakers argue that the fuel economy targets set by President Obama were too draconian, they couldn't meet them, etc., etc. Now, there are studies that suggest that is not the case. In fact, in previous years, when standards have been set and the auto industry has said, we can't meet these, help, the standards have remained in place, and the auto industry has not only met those standards, but it's exceeded those standards. That means it's produced cars that get better fuel economy than they were mandated, better emissions than they were mandated. And so this lobbying is seen as a direct attack on electric vehicles and electric vehicle adoption in the US. Now, it does appear that those fuel economy standards are going to be rolled back, and the EPA is being dismantled piece by piece by piece, so that there are less regulations affecting emissions of vehicles. And that's going to mean that automakers are going to push more towards the SUV and the pickup market. And that's a big problem because full-size SUVs and full-size pickups are far less energy efficient than, say, compact hatchbacks, electric vehicles. And so we're going to see fuel economy dropping, we're going to see pollution increasing, and that's a terrible thing. At the same time, a lot of states across the US are being lobbied individually by fossil fuel companies, consumer organizations. Very often those consumer organizations are actually backed by fossil fuel industry or have some kind of backdoor funding that makes them much, much more cancerous than they first appear. And these groups are effectively saying to states, you need to start taxing electric vehicles. You need to start taxing electric vehicles because electric vehicle drivers use the roads and they don't pay towards the upkeep of those roads because they're not buying gasoline, they're not buying diesel, and so therefore they're not contributing their tax dollars to the upkeep of the roads. Now, that conceit, to begin with, is false. When you pay your state taxes, some of your state taxes go towards the upkeep of the roads. It's not just collected through fuel duty. Some of that money is collected through fuel duty, but your state also shuttles some of your income tax dollars towards the upkeep of the roads. There are other schemes being looked at. I mean, the state of Oregon has this optional pay-as-you-go driving trial at the moment where you can actually sign up and you pay per mile that you drive a certain number of cents at the end of the year or at the end of the month that help pay towards the upkeep of the roads. So there are alternatives to these high taxations at the point of sale or at the point of registration or at every annual renewal of that registration. But that is what's going on at the moment. And it struck me very clearly this morning how different the two sides of the Atlantic are. So you see Europe's really pushing electric cars now, really pushing autonomous vehicle technology, working very, very, very hard to achieve that zero emission future, hitting zero emission in certain countries by 2020, 2030 for new car sales. Meanwhile, over here in the US, we've got an administration that is pushing to relax some of the legislation that prevents heavy polluters from damaging the environment. We've got a pushback from the auto industry to make bigger, heavier, less fuel efficient, more gas guzzling vehicles because that's what they claim the consumer wants. And at the same time, you've got the lobbying of states by individual groups who are essentially working to undermine the benefits of an electric car. There are an increased number of anti-EV videos I've seen on YouTube of late. I've seen a lot more aggression towards my car when driving in traffic by people with big pickup trucks. I've had more coal rolling experiences in the last couple of months as well. Now, personally, I think battery electric vehicles are probably going to be the ultimate answer, but I might be wrong. And if it turns out that I am wrong, whatever the replacement is great as long as it has zero emissions, as long as it has a net zero impact on the planet we live in. Are we going to see a U-turn in Europe? Are we going to see a U-turn in America? And is the U-turn in America going to be too late to promote cleaner, greener, safer and smarter vehicles? Yes, I know that individual states within the Union are still working very hard to promote EVs. I live in one such state, and I'm very glad for that fact. But what about the rest of the US? What about the rest of the world? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. And if you liked what you saw today, please consider keeping us independent and impartial. Make a donation to the Patreon crowdfunding campaign for Transport Evolved. There's a link in the description below, as well as one right at the end of this video. I'll hopefully be back tomorrow. So until then, have a great rest of your day. I'm Nikki Gordon-Blainfield and keep evolving.